That's one new locally acquired case notified to the department in the last 24 hours. That's the one case that we had previewed yesterday. There is also one returned traveller who is in hotel quarantine who was tested positive as well. So just to be clear, the one new locally acquired case that we're confirming today was the one that we were talking about as being under investigation yesterday. There were 25,144 test results received by the department overnight. That's a very strong number for a Sunday, and we again thank each and every one of those 25,000 people for going and getting tested. That's how we keep all of us safe, and it's how we ensure that this circuit breaker works. We're very, very grateful to every single person who's come forward and got tested, and of course to the staff taking the swabs, the laboratory technicians processing them. And again, the message is a very clear one to every single Victorian, regardless of where you've been or who you've been with or where you live. If you have any symptoms, however mild, please come forward and get tested, and don't delay in doing that. We will get your result to you within 24 hours. Hopefully that's a negative test result. But if it is positive, then we will protect you, your loved ones, and indeed through that, protect every single Victorian. In terms of the Holiday Inn, that new case, the one that's gone from under investigation to confirmed, takes the total number of linked cases to 17. It's also linked to the function at 426 Sydney Road, Coburg on the night of February 6. She is asymptomatic. She was swabbed 4 times over the 13th and 14th of February, variably returning both negative and weak positive results. Given her exposure and the variability of those results, our public health team have taken the most conservative approach and have deemed her a positive case. That, I think, is the appropriate way to go, to be as conservative as possible so that we can isolate her close contacts, her secondary contacts, and test them. To that end, she had worked in a psychiatric unit at the Alfred and on psychiatric wards at the Northern Hospital in Broadmeadows, which is run by the Royal Melbourne Hospital. Even though this individual's result is unclear, we are assuming for the purposes of contact tracing and a rapid response that she is in fact positive. Those services have had those wards locked down. Staff, all those that she may have come in contact with, are all isolating and are being tested, and we'll be able to update you both on testing performance and results for primary close contacts and secondary close contacts over the hours and days to come. This has been a very rapid response, and one that is filled with an abundance of caution, but that's exactly the approach that we ought to take. Just in terms of slightly more broader context in relation to the Holiday Inn, yesterday we'd identified some 940 known primary close contacts. That number's now grown to around 1,100. There's also a further almost 1,600 people that are linked to Melbourne Airport Terminal 4. That was advised yesterday. We also advised yesterday that our contact tracing teams are working through calling all of those people that are associated with Terminal 4, and that those calls are now complete. Of the most recent data, just in terms of that national dashboard and our performance in a broad sense, and this is, I suppose, a long way of thanking all of those who are involved, both staff and those who are doing the contact tracing and the interviewing and all that work, but also the people who are picking up the phone and who are responding to text messages and who are playing such an important part in the management of this outbreak. The most recent data set of 933 close contacts identified on the 11th of February, 931 of those 933 were contacted within the 48-hour period. That's the guideline, that's the standard. That's 99.8%. So that is a very strong result. Yesterday's result on the same measure was 98.7%, and over the past week, when you aggregate them all together, it's 97.2%. So above what is required, and that's a testament to the hard work that so many thousands of people, and indeed so many thousands of Victorians, are doing in partnership with us. I just want to make a couple of comments in relation to case 17 and some of these more recent cases where they were not in the original net. They were not in our scope, if you like. This just further, I think, confirms why the advice from the Chief Health Officer to me and Cabinet to have this circuit breaker was the right call and remains the right call. When you've got people that were not part of either the primary or the secondary ring, and they have then been out moving through the community, not doing anything wrong, they've acted perfectly appropriately. That just confirms that our active assumption, which has always got to be our active assumption, that there are at least, say, a handful of cases out there that we don't know about. And if you have effective freedom of movement, then those people, it just stands to reason. Particularly with the UK strain, they will finish up infecting other people. I think these last couple of days really do confirm for us that as difficult as the call on Friday was, the advice that underpinned it was exactly the right call. Now, I just want to make a couple of very quick comments in relation to New Zealand. I spoke with Prime Minister Ardern early last evening in relation to their 3-day lockdown as a result of a number of mystery cases. Not only she had contacted me, and of course on behalf of Victorians I wished her well, but just from a very practical point of view, I know that AHPPC have looked at this issue. That one-way green zone has been paused and for that 72-hour period. From a very local point of view, I can confirm that there was a flight that arrived to Victoria from New Zealand yesterday. There are 152 people on board. We are following up each of those passengers as we speak and have been throughout the evening to determine, firstly, are they still in Victoria or have they travelled on somewhere else? And if they have, then we'll provide further assistance to other parts of the country where they may be by virtue of providing them with that info. Those that are still in Victoria, we are asking them to get tested and to isolate until they get a negative result. In essence, and I know every Victorian on Monday morning wants to know whether this is going to finish on Wednesday night. I'm not in a position to be able to confirm that, but I can say that thanks to the hard work of those Victorians who are coming forward and getting tested, the hard work of those Victorians who are isolating at home, not just protecting themselves, but protecting all of us, not just serving their interests, but serving every Victorian's interests. And of course, a very large number of staff who are working around the clock, doing that arduous, laborious task of sifting through detail after detail, ruling people in, ruling people out. On behalf of all Victorians, I'm grateful to them, and I'm able to say that these numbers, you never want positive cases, but these numbers are pleasing, and I think we are well placed. However, I've never been one to try and make bold predictions. We just have to take this 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time. But I think that this is a promising start these last 3 days, and I'm just so proud of all Victorians for the hard work that they've put in, and the fact that whilst this is painful and difficult, they know and understand that we're capable of getting this done. And we've got a big team working hard, and that team includes every single Victorian who's following the rules, who's doing as we ask them to do, whether it be in a very broad sense or very specifically based on where they've been and who they've been with. Those test numbers yesterday, that's a very strong result for a Sunday, more than 25,000. I am proud and very pleased of the way Victorians are dealing with this, and we just have to wait though to see how things unfold today and tomorrow and throughout Wednesday. We'll have more to say obviously with the passage of time and more results and as more things become known to us, but we are well placed right now, but right now is too early to be definitive about Wednesday evening. Now, as is the case always, Jerome has further details in relation to the work of all of our coronavirus detectives, as well as some further exposure site details and things of that nature. So I'll throw to him to take you through that, and then we're happy to take any and all questions you have.
Thank you, Premier. Good morning. 1 week into this Holiday Inn outbreak, I thought I'd give a status update on where we are with the overall investigation, and also to highlight a number of lines of inquiry that we've been able to close down successfully over the last few days, as well as really 2 major areas of inquiry that remain open to us today that we are working very hard to address. You'll recall that we started this outbreak with 3 residents within our Holiday Inn hotel quarantine system who arrived, we presume, with the COVID infection and we then saw transmission at the Holiday Inn on the 3rd and 4th of February. The first positive case of local transmission was identified last Sunday night, the 7th of February. This is case number 4, an authorised officer who was the first one that we detected through the routine testing program that we run within our hotel quarantine system. Over 118,000 tests we've now run for that daily testing of our CQV staff. That case number 4 had a total of 8 household and social contacts. 7 of those tested negative. 1 household member subsequently tested positive a few days later. That's case number 13. They were, of course, already isolating from that Sunday night, and as such we had no further exposure and no further exposure sites. Case number 5 was another resident on the 3rd floor of the Holiday Inn. They also tested positive a few days later on the 8th of February. They had already been isolating because of our advice on the Sunday night. They tested positive, had no further exposure. They continue to isolate securely. Case number 6 we identified as a food and beverage worker in the CQV hotel. She had 13 household and social contacts, and 12 of those have tested negative. 1 of them tested positive, another household member, case 10. They had also been quarantining safely since the 9th of February with case number 6, and there have been the only other people they've come into contact with have also tested negative. I should highlight at this point that all these cases I'm going through continue to isolate safely. They are all in their 14 days isolation, and all of these household and social contacts I'm going through are also continuing to isolate even when they return negative tests. Case number 8 we identified on the Wednesday was another resident of the Holiday Inn, a CQV resident. Again, they had been isolating. They had 3 primary close contacts who have all tested negative, and they all continue to isolate. So all those cases I've just gone through have essentially, all those branches of investigation have been closed off. We continue to ensure they isolate. We can now turn to the next set of cases. We have 3 individuals who share the same house. Case number 7 is a Holiday Inn worker, a food and beverage worker, who initially returned a negative test result on her last shift on the 7th of February, and this is the case that we discussed yesterday. She isolated from the 9th of February along with her household on advice that we gave to all CQV staff at that point in time. We retested her on the 9th of February, and she came back with a positive result on the 10th of February. Her partner, case number 9, had a number of primary close contacts through their work. You remember the RWF, basic point cook, Coates Hire, and so on. They have all returned negative test results. They've all been closed down. Case number 12 was a household member of case number 7, so our CQV quarantine staff member. She was the cafe worker at Brunetti's at Terminal 4. All staff at Brunetti's, all of her work contacts, all 12, have tested negative. We are still awaiting 1 outstanding test result from a customer. There were 34 customers in total. Most of those are interstate. We had 14 that remain in Victoria. We are awaiting 1 outstanding individual who we did a home visit with yesterday. Again, they're doing the right thing. We are awaiting their test result. I expect that through quite shortly. We've also, of course, as a result of the Brunetti exposure, we asked everybody who passed through Terminal 4 on Tuesday the 9th of February to isolate and to get tested. We have now had direct contact with 1,600 people. They were all messaged. We've also had phone calls with all 1,600 over the weekend. And again, my thanks to all of those people for taking those phone calls and for doing the hard thing of isolating for 14 days from that point of exposure. And those test results which are starting to come through. Our 3 cases, 7, 9 and 12, also attended a function on 426 Sydney Road in Coburg, back on Saturday the 6th of February. There were 38 people at this function. All of those, as I said yesterday, have been tested. 31 of those have returned a negative test result. They continue to isolate. A total of 7 people at that party have now returned a positive test, including our 3 people from our household. Case 14 was the first case identified with the connection to that party, and that was late on last Friday night, and they were a social contact. All of their direct contacts outside of the party, 2 rideshare drivers, 7 household and social contacts, all of those have tested negative. Case 15 is the 3-year-old child who was at the party. Again, we discussed case 15 yesterday. This retains a very active line of inquiry at this point in time. This is one of our priority cases to follow up at the moment. They attended Glenroy Central Kinder and the Good Start Early Learning Centre, also in Glenroy, over 3 days early last week. We've identified 101 primary close contacts across those 2 kinders, and there's a dedicated testing site set up today for the larger of those 2 kinders, and all close contacts have been isolating over the last day or so. We will continue to work and support all those families. We're also continuing more investigations to try to narrow down the number of primary close contacts within that 101. Case number 16 was also at the function on Sydney Road in Coburg. She is connected to a number of exposure sites that we published yesterday, including the Yarra Trams trips that we talked about yesterday, and Queen Victoria Market on the 9th of February between 8:25 a.m. and 10:10 a.m. I apologise. The Queen Victoria Market exposure was on Thursday, the 11th of February, between 8:25 a.m. and 10:10 a.m. And there were 2 Yarra Trams trips associated with that shopping trip. Details on our website. The case also visited the female toilets at Queen Vic Market, and as such we have listed those as our exposure sites. If people have been to those exposure sites, please, we would ask you to go and get tested today. On my way here today, I passed a number of our testing centres where people were doing just that, and I'm very grateful for them for doing that. It's really important that we close out the line of inquiry around the Queen Vic Market. My thanks also to the City of Melbourne and the facility managers for their support on this. Finally, of course, we have case 17, which the Premier has just mentioned. We confirmed that late last night after a number of different tests to confirm a weak positive is our net conclusion. We are taking a very precautionary approach. This case has work contact with 3 mental health units at Broadmeadows Hospital, Northern Hospital and at the Alfred. There are 150 primary close contacts across those 3 centres. They were all identified and furloughed and locked down last night. The majority are staff at those facilities. There are a very small number of patients, and again, they've all been identified. They're all being tested last night and continue to be tested today. And my thanks in particular to the Royal Melbourne and to Alfred Health and to all their staff. I appreciate again, our mental health services are so important, particularly at this time. And of course, this is a significant number of staff that we're going through to test to make sure that they're safe, and we will do that work as swiftly as we can. So that is a summary of where we are. Overall, as the Premier has said, we have over 1,100 primary close contacts. That does not include the kinder, the 101 at the kinders, or the 150 at the mental health units. Of the 1,106 or so primary close contacts that we have to date, almost 80% have now returned to negative test results. That includes our public exposure sites. I'm so grateful for all those people who've come forward. We're still looking for the remainder to come forward over the next day or so to conclude that testing picture. There are 130 people across those cases I've gone through that are very close immediate household and social contacts where the contact was the strongest. 129 of those have returned a negative test result. There's the one outstanding, which is our Brunetti worker, who I hope to follow up today. Finally, we have a couple of wastewater detections continue in the Coburg catchment and in the South Melbourne catchment. Again, I'd encourage people in those areas, if you have any symptoms, any cause for concern, please go and get tested. And really, of course, that advice continues for all other Victorians as well. In terms of testing, another, as the Premier said, solid 25,000 plus day. Again, really fantastic to see such good throughput at all of our testing centres. At this point in time, we have all of our testing centres are at well up to capacity, and I'd encourage anybody who is thinking of getting tested, anybody with any concerns anywhere in Victoria, please do not regard this as just a localised outbreak. This is a significant outbreak for us to get under control, and the next day or so are critical times for us to ensure that everybody can come forward and get tested. We can confirm that over 99% of test results are still occurring by the next day, so if you get tested today, you will have your results tomorrow. With that, I'll hand back to the Premier for questions. Thank you.
Well, as I said before, it's too early for us to say, but these are promising results, but the more detective work you do, then the more people will come into focus, and that's why people are working around the clock and working very hard. It's too early for us to be able to make a definitive prediction about Wednesday evening. That will become more and more certain as today and tomorrow, and we'll get results on Wednesday morning.
So you'll make the call on Wednesday then?
Oh, look, I think that's probably it's safe to assume that we will wait, as we always have, to have the most contemporary picture, the most data, the most evidence as to what's going on out there. But as soon as, perhaps the best if I answer it this way, as soon as we can possibly give Victorians news one way or the other, we will.
Do you have a tolerable level of new cases that would allow... Do you have an acceptable amount of new cases that would allow us to go out of lockdown?
Oh, look, this has never really been about just the sheer number of cases. It's about whether they are contained, and whether their primary close contacts, their casual secondary close contacts are locked down. The individual circumstances of each case have always become always been very important to us, and they become even more important when you're in circumstances like this. So it's difficult to put a raw number on it and to try and, I think characterise it in that way. Every case on its merits, the individual circumstances of every case, and particularly the number of exposure days they've had, the status of their primary and secondary close contacts, all those things which have been a feature all the way through, they become even more important now.
14
But I would just say, I know that everyone would love to have that sort of metric, and I'd love to be able to be absolutely definitive on Monday morning about what will happen Wednesday night, but that wouldn't be being honest with people, and we just have to let this unfold. I know it's painful, I know it's challenging, but you want the most contemporary picture.
Will regional Victoria...
Go here first.
14 days was the standard virus cycle considered during the first and second lockdown. Why should Victorians have any confidence that this will be any different?
Well, because we're in very different circumstances, and this is not about changing the cycle of the virus. It's about making sure we've got a public health response wrapped around everybody who is infected, or could be possibly infected. And that's why people isolate for the 14 days. Because even with a negative test, if you've been in contact with somebody who has tested positive, then it may take some time for that to come forward. But if we've got a response around you, if you're at home, if you're not going out, and we're testing you and retesting you, then we're confident that that is the appropriate way to go. The key point, though, is finding all those people and wrapping that response around them. So no one's suggesting that the 14 days has changed. Ultimately, if you've got people with a public health response, if we've got our arms around those people, if you like, then we can then have a greater degree of confidence. And so far, that's exactly what the work of thousands of contact tracers and millions of Victorians, that's what's been delivered over the last couple of days.
Will regional Victoria...
So we're going to go...
Will regional Victoria continue to be bound to metropolitan Melbourne when it comes to that lockdown?
Look, I've been very clear about this. There are no cases in regional Victoria that we know of, and we want to keep it that way. We want to make sure that we're not having a situation where, because there are, softer rules in one part of the state, and no time to set up a definitive ring of steel.
Would a 5-day lockdown be enough time to set up a definitive ring of steel lockdown?
Well, I don't believe so. Not without, you no longer have, you barely have it up, and you'll be taking the thing down. And that means police have to come out of stations, all sorts of different things. That abundance of caution is very important. And I know that people in regional Victoria, and indeed every single Victorian, no one is enjoying this. This is not in any way easy. It's very challenging. But the last thing we want, and I've said this a few times, but just let me take you through our thinking once more. You do just Melbourne. You pretend you've got a ring of steel up when, that does take a little bit of time. You have softer rules in regional Victoria. Large numbers of people go to regional Victoria. We get Melbourne all under control after 5 days, so everything's great. And then a week later, we've got sewerage going off all the way across regional Victoria potentially, because just as people travel to regional Victoria, the virus travels to regional Victoria. I know it's deeply challenging, but that is not the outcome we want. And it's not something that we would ever want to contribute to.
We're still in the second degree of the three contacts of contacts of people who have been infected so far.
Yes.
If we remain at that stage on Wednesday, we're only contacts of people who have been in the hotel and have been infected, is it likely that we'll move out of a lockdown, or is it a history case that is not immediately unlinked? Is that what will trigger trigger it to be extended. And I think the level of clarity, given the amount of concern and anxiety in the community, would be something that I think a lot of the public would really like to
I don't disagree. Well, hang on a second. I don't disagree with you that everyone would like an answer right now about Wednesday night. We all would. But I can make something up if you like, but that's not going to have any benefit to anybody. I've tried to be clear. We have to wait and see what happens today, tomorrow, and into Wednesday. And as soon as we can provide people with that clarity, and again, it's not about a rule, if you like. I know you are citing, you're perfectly accurate in what you're saying broadly. The issue here, though, is every case on its merits, the individual circumstances of every case, where they've been, do we have a handle on all the people they've been with, how long were they out and about, and that's why a shutdown makes that task much easier, because you don't have that almost unlimited movement. That's why you have to go to that short, sharp lockdown, as painful as it is, because it means that you do not just have time, but you have limited movement, and that's the most important thing. I don't dispute that in any way that people would love to know exactly what's going to happen right now at midnight on Wednesday night. I would too. I can't predict that right now. All I can say is things are going well, but we can't be complacent. We've got to keep chasing. We've got to be as fast as this virus, and that's proving tough.
Yeah.
Based on the high,
you can't predict the future, I totally understand that in terms of what the cases will what the dynamics will be in 2 days. But what you can explain is the public health parameters that your team is wanting to see by Wednesday.
No, I can explain them, and I just have explained them. That we'll look at every single case on its merits. And look, let me give you one example. An exposure site in an environment where everybody was wearing masks for a short period of time would be very different to an extended period of time in an exposure site where people were not wearing masks. So, every case on its merits. And again, I'm not being critical of the question, and I understand exactly where you're coming from, and I'd like to be able to provide a definitive answer as well, but it simply wouldn't mean much. We just have to wait and see what unfolds today, what unfolds tomorrow, and indeed what happens on Wednesday. And it won't just be the mathematics of this, it won't just be the quantity, it's also a whole range of qualitative judgments. The individual epidemiology of each case has to be a factor, together with testing rates, together with all those other things. But as we stand here now, we're always pleased to be reporting a very small number of cases, and that incredibly high percentage of people that we've got to, almost 100% of people, despite the large numbers, we've got to them in very good time. That's pleasing.
Has they got a high
decision nebulizer inside the Holiday Inn hotel we've spoken to 3AW this morning. This is the second time it's spoken to the media. He says no one from your government has reached out to you to get this side of the story. Why doesn't this happen?
Well, I've got nothing to add beyond what Kassar indicated the other day. This person's receiving the very best of care in a Victorian public hospital. I thank the staff who are taking care of him. I wish him well, and I hope his recovery is complete and as fast as possible. As for who has spoken with him, I'm sure that a number of people who have spoken with him about all manner of things is a positive case. I certainly haven't spoken to him, and I'm not interested in having a debate about these matters. I have nothing to add beyond that. I have nothing to add beyond what the head of CQV said
Why
Saturday.
won't you investigate further?
Again, I'll just draw you back to what Emma Kassar, the head of CQV, and she's not doing CQV work, she runs our prisons, she is a very senior person. I think she went through all of these issues, and I do not propose to add any further.
Across the pandemic in terms of people following the rules that you've set.
So I just missed the first part.
Based on the high compliance rates,
yes.
How come you can't rely on people in the city obeying the 5-kilometre rule to allow the regions to open up? You're saying that you don't want it to spread.
No. It isn't a matter of, if I read your question right, it isn't a matter of assuming that people would breach the 5-kilometre rule. But if you have different rules and they're not instantaneous, and it's not very often, if perhaps ever, that we've done like a snap rule change effective immediately. I could be wrong in that, but I don't believe so. If we had said at, I'm trying to recall now on Friday, what time did I go out? Around, say, 2, 1 or something like that, around that time. If in the early afternoon of Friday I had said, the rules change at midnight and they only apply to Melbourne, it's not about 5 days, you'd have to have the ring of steel up pretty much then. Otherwise people, and again I'm not having a go at anyone, I'm just being clear, I think the logic tells you that many people would have gone to the place where the rules are easier. That's not a criticism, that's I just think a fact. And we have seen a bit of that over the last 12 months. So it isn't about assuming people would do the wrong thing, it's assuming that people would act within the rules, and the fact that we are limited in that you can't just click your fingers and change the rules and suddenly, if you like, put up a border between metropolitan Melbourne and regional Victoria in the space of a few hours.
Has a decision been made on the future of the Holiday Inn? Will that go back into the quarantine program in that hotel?
I need to talk to CQV. I know it's been terminally cleaned. I think I assume that process has been finished. There's no one there now. From a hotel quarantine point of view, I'm happy to ask them what their view is about the future of that particular facility. They probably also provide you with an update on that flooding issue at the Flinders Street under the same brand, which occurred a couple of months ago.
Trevor, what do you say today to Victorians who 111 days of lockdown last year might be asking, how is it the case that their government still lacks such confidence in the hotel quarantine systems and contact tracing, that you apparently can't manage 2 to 3 cases of COVID a day in a population of about 6.3 million people?
Well, you've made a number of assertions there.
Well, they're a fact, actually.
Well, no, they're not. You've just put it to me that there's a lack of confidence. Absolutely, I'm more than confident in the team we have and in the Victorian community that they can get through this. So, with the greatest of respect, you have put a number of things to me that are not accurate.
But if you have confidence in the system, which your own bureaucrat actually just explained, frankly, is working quite well, why do you need a lockdown?
Well, because the public health advice to me is that given the speed with which this moves, given the assumption that has to guide the decision making, much as it would have, I'm sure, guided decision making to close the northern beaches in Sydney or Brisbane or Perth or Adelaide, where there's been similar issues coming out of hotel quarantine. The public health advice is, particularly with this UK strain, and just the other day we put up on the screen a number of charts that demonstrated that despite enormous numbers of people coming forward and getting tested, and indeed despite tests being processed quickly, contact tracing being done well above the national standard, that is what is expected of all of us, close contacts had been infected by the time we became aware of the primary case. That is the definition of something moving fast.
But the data that we just provided shows that they were contacts, they were really well identified.
Well, not all of them actually. Some of them are coming to scope.
They've been well identified and pinned down. The hospitals aren't in any danger of being overwhelmed. It's a small number of cases. That all suggests that your system is actually working pretty well to contain it. So why the need for lockdown?
Well, that's a very different question to the one that you asked at the beginning, where you contended that there were all sorts of confidence issues.
Well, I'm going based on the New Zealand weekend that lockdown was needed because contact tracers could not keep up with the spread in the UK, where it was required with black confidence.
No, that's not what it implies at all. That's not what it implies at all. What it implies and what it actually states is that this thing's moving really fast. That shouldn't be taken as a criticism of thousands of people who are working night and day and are pulling this up. I suppose I'll put it to you this way, Lee, if you're putting it to me that I ought to ignore the advice that's provided to me by the Chief Health Officer, well, I will not do that. Just like I'm sure each and every other Premier who across the state has had to go to these short, sharp circuit breaker lockdowns, they didn't ignore the advice of their public health teams, nor has Prime Minister Ardern in New Zealand ignored the advice of her public health team. You know, I don't know, I really wouldn't think that you would want a situation where, for the sake of being popular or the sake of avoiding, you know, the real challenges that are faced by making these sorts of decisions, you ignored that advice, only to be back here in a fortnight answering a whole lot of different questions about why I'd ignored advice. I just don't do that.
But what's the circuit that you're breaking? Because your own experts just made it clear what a good job's being done in terms of containment and tracing. So,
I'm not sure that line of questioning follows that it'd be better if there was a heap more cases.
No, I'm just saying that
It doesn't make much sense to me.
There's a lot of spread in your community.
Well, yes, but this is the whole thing. You have to always, and I would have thought it's a pretty clear point, and I've made this point literally thousands of times, you have to assume, just like epidemiologists, public health experts and political leaders across the globe, you have to assume there are more cases out there than you know about, because if you assume otherwise and you are proven wrong, then there's no going back. There's no duo. You don't get to go, well, I'll just rewind these 2 weeks and make the decision that the officials told me to make that I refuse to make.
So are you going to put Australia into a 5-day lockdown every time you have 2 or 3 new cases a day?
Well, as I was just saying, we'll look at every positive case on its merits. We would always work as hard as we possibly can to avoid having any statewide measures, any extra rules. But look,
That's
this
pretty
is...
hard news for Victorians to take. But 2 to 3 cases a day, the system may not be able to handle it. That's on the table, that you might have a 5-day lockdown every time you have 2 or 3
again,
cases.
I think it's important to acknowledge that when you use terms like the system may not be able to handle it, this is not the 2020 virus. This is a very different virus. If you want to look at systems that can't handle things, well, have a look at Europe. Have a look at so many parts of the world. They're dealing with what happens when this UK strain runs wild. There's just no pulling it up. And particularly when you get so close, and we've seen some very encouraging announcements overnight from the Commonwealth Government in relation to the vaccine rollout. And we look forward to playing our part in that. However we can help, we're there to do the very best we possibly can. When you're so close to having frontline workers and particularly vulnerable Victorians getting that jab, we've got to hold these settings. We've got to protect what we've built, and that's exactly what we've done based on advice. And far from I think being criticised for having followed advice and seeing low case numbers because people are working their guts out and doing a very good job, I think that's a far preferable outcome than having more cases. You always want less.
If snap lockdowns are going to continue to be a tool, an option for a small number of cases, how can Victorian businesses make any regular planning, let alone investment planning?
Well, again, I'm not accepting, and I think it's just wrong to say that they're a tool for a small number of cases as such.
You use the
They're
term small number of cases
they're a tool, yeah, and also I think about 14 times made the point, Lee, that every case on its merits. So I think we'll sort of get... Anyway, I'm putting it to you that we will always reserve the right to look at individual cases and to follow the advice that is given to us. And I just don't think you wouldn't want it any other way, because the notion... Now let's just go back to first principles here. If I'm... would you really want me to be shopping around for the best advice, the most politically popular advice?
No,
would you really want me to say, oh well, gee, that'll be incredibly hard? And I'm not doubting that for a moment how hard it is. I'm not prepared to do that.
Not at all, Premier. What I'm trying to get to is, obviously, as you would agree, lockdowns impose a real cost to the community. Victorians have already paid a really high price because of the long lockdown last year. Your own team has made it clear that the cases are actually very well traced, managed and contained.
Yes.
So why do we need to resort to the harsh measure of a lockdown?
Well, I think I've already gone through that a number of times. I went through that on Friday for the best part of two hours. I'm happy to do it again, but again, the types of cases, this UK strain, the fact that despite the amazing efforts of all of our contact tracers and testers, cath lab workers, and the work of so many genuine hard-working Victorians, we had a situation where at the same time as we're becoming aware of the primary case, they've already infected their close contacts. That's not something we've seen before. The speed at which this has moved saw our public health team make the very difficult decisions based on the best of science and the best understanding you can possibly have of any outbreak, that this was a difficult but a proportionate and necessary thing to do. And look, I would, if at the end of this, the view of you or others is that this was too much, well, you're free to form those views. What I am not free to do is to ignore advice and have a situation where I sort of shop around for whatever will be most popular, only then to be proven wrong and to have not one or two cases, but something much worse than that, and particularly on the cusp of the vaccine being rolled out. I know and appreciate very well what Victorians have been able to achieve. There's no other jurisdiction in the world that has been able to achieve what we have achieved. It is a credit to the character and the compassion and the absolute determination of the Victorian community. We know what to do, and I'm so grateful that that's exactly what Victorians are doing, coming forward and getting tested, listening to the public health advice that is given to them, following the rules, and also when they're asked to make that incredibly difficult decision, or a very challenging thing to do, to stay at home for 14 days, on the chance that you may have it. To do that at such high levels, it is a credit to every single Victorian.
But on the speed at which the UK variant is spreading, several epidemiologists have said this morning that it's spreading at a normal rate. Are you able to explain how fast it is actually spreading and where we're getting that data from?
Well, I'll make a couple of general points. I think we've seen across the board over the last 12 months or so, many different people in that field of science have many different views. That's not to be critical of them. People can form different views. That's perfectly entitled to do that. We don't run a Australia-wide survey of every epidemiologist before we make a judgment about keeping Victorians safe. I follow the advice of the Chief Health Officer, his deputies. There is consultation and discussion with AHPPC, and I just say, without any sense of criticism of those people who are often academics, this is not an academic exercise. We're not writing a paper for someone's thesis here. This is real, and people find a second guess. That might be part of what they do, but I don't second guess the public health advice that I'm given, because I know it to be the exact public health advice that saw us do what no other jurisdiction has done, and that is defeat a second wave. And by following that very same public health advice, we will avoid a third wave. You'll always get lots of different opinions. That's not an unhealthy thing, but they're not in the seat. They're off on the sidelines, and that's a very different set of responsibilities. It's a very different world. I respect them, and they're perfectly entitled to not necessarily agree, but they're not the ones that are making those calls. As to international evidence about the transmission and the rates of transmission, I'm more than happy to have the Chief Health Officer speak to you.
Thanks, Premier. Look, it's certainly the case that this is a more infectious virus. There have been different numbers thrown around. I'm certainly aware of a range of 40 to 70% more infectious, which was out of the UK in the early days. That's been claimed to be 34% or thereabouts in more recent times. There are weaknesses in the analysis for all of those ranges, all of those numbers. The fact is, almost everyone is settling on the fact that it's a more infectious virus. As for the median incubation period, the time from being exposed to then causing illness in individuals, I've also seen evidence, and I can post it, that relates to the fact that it might be up to a day shorter median than previous variants. In Victoria's specific circumstances, and it might just be related to randomness, it might be related to the specific cases that we've had, but we've had individuals, including this case who was at the private function, 2 days after being exposed, maybe 3 days after being exposed, not just infectious, but infectious enough to really cause a transmission event at that indoor function. So there's an absolute need for a precautionary approach in that regard. On the issue of contact tracing metrics are absolutely terrific at the moment in Victoria. So from the time of notification to the time of interview, 2 hours. 24 hours is the national standard. From the time of notification to the isolation of close contacts or the identification of primary close contacts, the national standard is 48 hours. We're sitting around 17 to 19 hours. If contact tracing did the entire job of managing a pandemic, then we wouldn't see Auckland going through its third lockdown, WA, South Australia, Avalon, Brisbane. It can't do everything. We've got dozens of exposure sites, we've got thousands of people potentially exposed, and the difference between those potentially exposed individuals having 1 or 2 close contacts during a circuit breaker versus having 100 close contacts is enormous. And so again, we don't want to be sitting here. Everyone can be wise after the fact. You didn't need this, you got on top of it, or it's out of control, why didn't you do X last week or the week before? We don't want to be in a situation where we're talking about people who've been in an exposure site, suddenly they've got 20 close contacts who are also testing positive, who've also had 100 close contacts. We absolutely do not want to be in that situation. So we're making judgments on the basis of terrific metrics, performance metrics for our contact tracing, but knowing that there are literally thousands of potentially exposed people that we need to chase up.
Can I just get you to elaborate a bit, Brett? Hello. So I hear all of what you're saying, and the contact tracing is working very well. I mean, as you correctly point out, you can't rely totally on that, you have to rely on other things. But say when you're talking about people's contacts, generally because you've got such great compliance with mask wearing and social distancing, that's another ring of protection as well. And so when we were going through the numbers, you were hearing that at Brunetti, you had all these tests and nobody had caught it. So I'm just wondering, when you look at all of those things together, you actually have a very well-managed situation without going into a lockdown, let alone a statewide lockdown, which nobody else has done. So that's why I'm asking about confidence, because you look at that in isolation, it's actually working pretty well. So why wouldn't you have confidence to stay on that path?
So it's working extremely well. That said, there are still thousands of people who've been through Terminal 4. Imagine if that Brunetti worker and their close contacts are tested negative, so probably not that infectious. But imagine if that individual were very infectious. We find out all of their close contacts test negative a week later, but the 4,000 people who've been through that terminal over that period of time, there are dozens and dozens of them who subsequently test positive. Now, they won't all have read the exposure sites, they won't all know that they've been exposed, and they won't all necessarily test. We've got high rates of people who are symptomatic who are testing, but it's not everyone. And so those are the circumstances where you suddenly see a mystery case here, a mystery case there, and you have no connection to be able to wrap the public health response around it. We're not in that situation now, but we could have been, and we really need to minimise, right through this 5-day period, the number of individual close contacts that potentially exposed people have for that reason.
So does that mean that it's likely that your advice, at times where we have 2 to 3 cases every day, is it going to continue to be we need circuit breaker lockdowns?
Look, it's absolutely a case-by-case basis. Remember, the Grand Hyatt had a case of the variant of concern who'd been out to dozens of exposure sites in the community. We didn't do a lockdown. Now, other jurisdictions have done that. Not at all critical, but we've managed a case who's been out to dozens of exposure sites because we wrapped that public health response around it. But if we saw, like Auckland scene, a community cluster of 3 cases, no clear link back to where it's from, and the potential for many other people to be missed in the chain of transmission, we would consider that differently. It may or may not require a step up in the public health response. We just need to take it on a case-by-case basis.
So it's fair to say that the methods that perhaps make more business for an entity that's the thing that's breached out.
Look, there were a number of factors. It was effectively a super spreading event at the hotel to begin with. We had a venue where an individual who was there had tested negative that wasn't in scope for the contact tracing, where it took 5 days for the later positive test to then make us consider it to be in scope. That was entirely appropriate that we didn't call it an exposure site when someone had tested negative. They were assumed not to be infectious. That's how everyone would act. That's the national standard again. So there were a number of factors. Brunetti's, of course, was a particular concern, but there were many elements that we had in consideration at the time.
Brett, is there any evidence?
For a 5-day lockdown, or was it for 2 weeks?
No, it was for a 5-day lockdown. That was agreed and discussed through Cabinet.
Just the infectiousness as such, I want to ask a question about the graph that Jerome alluded to used last week, which was the basis for the Friday decision for the lockdown. The hotel quarantine worker tested negative on the Sunday, wasn't tested Monday, wasn't tested Tuesday, and then was tested positive Wednesday. Her close contacts all tested positive on the Thursday. That 1 day period was then used as the justification for the rapid infectiousness of the virus. She may well have been incubating from the Saturday or Sunday and been positive by the Monday or Tuesday, but there was no test done. So how was that used as a basis for the rapid infectiousness if we didn't actually know if that person was positive on Monday or Tuesday, which meant that the incubation period might actually have been totally standard for passing on to her contacts?
So, we think the exposure event at the hotel was the 3rd or 4th of February, almost certainly the 4th of February in terms of everyone else who was connected, who became cases, were on that 3rd floor on the 4th of February. So an event on the 6th of February is an indication that there's a rapid time between exposure and not just infectiousness, but really significant infectiousness to infect a number of people at that setting.
Brett, is there any...
That means that the original justification was not around the Coburg event, it was around the passing on to the primary household contacts.
There was no single justification. There were a number of elements that came into play.
The justification, not used by Jerome, it was the fundamental justification. You're now saying...
No, you weren't there in the discussions with Cabinet. There were a number of elements that we spoke through that related to the risk of this being a significant event and requiring additional public health measures, and that was one element.
I understand, but you're now saying that she likely picked it up on the 3rd or 4th, which meant that the incubation period for passing it on to a primary contacts was standard, absolutely standard.
So we're working on an incubation period of 14 days. There's no question. That's what we're working on. How many people get infected, how likely it is for someone who's a brief close contact or within a space like this to be infected has changed with the variants of concern. Not so significantly that it's like a measles virus that can infect 20 people who are unvaccinated from one case, but enough to be on an exponential curve that would make a difference of tens of thousands of cases over a short period of time.
Was it honest for Jerome to use that timeline as justification?
I'll let Jerome speak to his own words.
Jerome, was it honest to use that timeline?
The man in ICU has said that you called him last week, but that you didn't ask any questions about what interaction he had with CQB staff about the nebulizer. Is that a correct characterisation? And if so, why didn't you ask that?
It is a correct characterisation. I was requested to speak to him, and it's not my place to do CQB's work in terms of the critical incident review that I would expect them to lead.
And just on nebulizers more broadly, there are people who require CPAP machines, well, on CPAP machines more than nebulizers, there are people who require those machines to breathe and would be in danger of death at worst case scenario if they didn't have access to one. What is the situation for those people now as they're flying out to Australia?
So people who need CPAP machines should use them and will use them. We need to be, again, alert to the potential increased risk of transmission with CPAP. I don't think it's as clear as nebulizers. Nebulizers have been known to contribute to bacterial and viral spreading events. CPAP less clear as a risk. Nonetheless, it'll be managed with concern about the increased potential. So maybe cohorted on the same floor. I've suggested to CQB that portable air filters for those rooms might be a consideration as well. So there's a bunch of things being looked into.
Brett, ultimately, it's obviously your call as to whether we come out of lockdown as planned on Wednesday night. How are you feeling at this point?
It's going as well as we could expect. Every single case has been linked. Those immediate social and household close contacts testing negative, that's all terrific news. I'm always aware that we can have a day where something comes completely out of left field. I hope that doesn't happen. We need to be alive to that.
Is there any increased risk, sorry before you go to Premier, any increased risk or decreased risk with a 3-year-old compared to an adult? In terms of the last wave, it was sort of deemed a lower risk with children in contagion?
We certainly expect that for children, especially young children, that the risk of transmission to others is lower, maybe as much as a third the transmission risk. So I think that's encouraging, and everyone who's been in the early learning or childcare settings or had children with this 3-year-old should be reassured by that. Also by the fact that young children especially have a very, very, very low risk of significant illness.
And can we just clarify today whether it's based on mother of the 3-year-old?
Yes.
Just speaking of children, any special consideration going to be given to schools reopening on Thursday, even if we need to extend this?
Oh, we'll consider all of the elements of post-Wednesday as separate things, if you like. So yes, schools will be a consideration along with everything else, whatever actions we take post-Wednesday.
You envisage things like gathering sizes being brought significantly down after Wednesday? We're going to a stage 3 after Wednesday?
Oh, look,
you expect it to revert back to pre-Friday?
It all has to be considered again by what plays out over the next 48 hours. But you know, you've seen from other jurisdictions they haven't necessarily gone back to exactly the settings pre, you know, their cases out of hotel quarantine or wherever.
Craig, just a question for you, please. That mandatory